On stage with us, we have Kyle. Kyle is the founder and writer behind Growth Unhinged, a weekly newsletter and resource followed by over 75,000 founders, operators, investors, etc., etc. GrowthUnhinged.com for if you don't know it yet. And for the past 15 years, Kyle has been helping software startups scale and focusing on growth mainly. I think Kyle's going to show us so many new things. Bring your notes out if you can. Before launching Growth Unhinged, he was an operating partner at OpenView. And outside of the SaaS world, Kyle's interests, this is nice, we want to have personal stuff, include tennis, hiking, cooking Mediterranean food. Kyle, we want to hear about that. And pushing through Barry's workouts. Who is Barry? I don't know, but he sounds great. So without further ado, his talk is going to be how the best SaaS companies are rethinking monetization. It's a great way to open this event. Give a huge round of applause for Kyle Poyar.
Hello.
Hey everyone, great to see you. Does this work? I am a certified software monetization nerd, and I can tell you now is, I think, the most interesting time in monetization that there probably has ever been in this space. And as much as I've loved pricing for the last 15 years, SaaS pricing used to be kind of boring. The old playbook looked something like this, right? We'd undercharge for our products, figured out who got the most value, built more stuff for them, raised prices, rinse and repeat. This has worked for SaaS companies for a while. It's still working for many folks today, but it's breaking down in the age of AI, right? It's possible if you've got 90% plus margins. It's much harder if you have AI-style margins. And there was this talk for a long time about how LLMs were going to come down in cost by 10x every year, right? All we should care about is distribution, and we can figure out costs later. That's not exactly what's playing out, right? The best LLMs are still fairly expensive. The costs aren't dropping. And customers want access to the best. They don't want yesterday's newspaper. Meanwhile, token volume is exploding through additional reasoning and agentic capabilities. And in my work with companies, I found that the top 10% of customers might represent about 70 to 80% of your costs. So for many companies, probably in this room, your best customers are your most unprofitable customers, right? We want to fix that here. The other thing in SaaS pricing is that it used to be kind of okay to copy what the big players were doing. We could go look at Salesforce, assume they've got a big pricing team, they do a bunch of research. Whatever they're doing probably works. Well, even the biggest players are scrambling when it comes to AI monetization. So Salesforce, for example, launched their AI product with a conversation-based pricing model. A few months later, they scrambled to introduce a credit-based pricing model. Now that's the primary model that they sell. OpenAI was seat-based. They've moved to a pooled credit model for their enterprise plans. And Cursor, over the summer, launched a new credit-based pricing model as well. They got a lot of backlash, particularly around how they communicated it. So you can't just copy what some of the big players are doing and assume they figured it out. Now, I've been obsessed with this topic for a while. I write a newsletter called Growth Unhinged, where I feature insights and case studies for companies tackling pricing and monetization, but also broader growth. I also do a lot of research, and I recently conducted a survey about 240 software and AI businesses and how they monetize their products. I'll include data from that survey here. And then I work hands-on with companies. I've worked with over 100 software companies and AI companies increasingly on how they monetize their products as an operating partner at OpenView. And then before that, I was at Simon Kucher, which is the leading pricing strategy consulting firm. And based on all that, those insights and experiences, I've distilled my learnings into 6 rules of monetization in the age of AI. Now, I will be the first to admit, I don't know all the answers, right? If I told you I knew exactly how to price AI and how it was going to be in 2 years from now, you shouldn't trust someone who says that. But hopefully you find these as lessons in a kind of emerging frameworks that will help you incrementally improve and be adaptable as things change. So first rule is that how you charge impacts how much your customers will be willing to pay. And so I want you to think about, how did you pay for your last car ride? Right? Did you buy a car? Did you lease a car? Rent a car? Called an Uber, maybe a Bolt, I guess since we're in Europe, hired a chauffeur? You have a lot of options, right? And these interestingly map to different pricing models in tech, right? Buying is kind of like an on-premise model. Leasing is more like a subscription SaaS model. Renting is more like a usage-based model. Calling an Uber is more like an outcome-based model. And a chauffeur is more of a service as a software model, where we're paying essentially for the service of driving and the technology at the same time. Now, over time, we've seen a shift from owning software to hiring software and paying for the work that software delivers. That doesn't mean the old buying models go away. They're actually still very present. It just means there's greater complexity and greater choice for the customer. And when we move from model to model, what was interesting is that each phase actually unlocked pricing power. So when we moved from on-premise to SaaS, we didn't actually pay less for SaaS. We paid less upfront and more over time for products that really delivered results. Yeah, can folks hear me all right? Cool. So we paid more over time for products that deliver results, and that forced companies to do things like invest in product development, to invest in customer success teams to earn that renewal so that we would get that LTV of the customer. In my work with companies, I've seen that one way to look at this is to look at the percentage of the overall economic value or ROI that you create for customers. What % are you able to capture in your own pricing? In traditional on-premise models, we were only able to capture about 5%, right? The customer had a big upfront expense for the product. They were fully on the hook to implement the product, and if something went wrong, it was really on them. As we move towards more models like outcome-based or success-based pricing, I'm seeing companies capture 25% or more of the economic value of their products. It's because the vendor is taking on all of the risk. The customer has no upfront fees, right? They're only paying when they're really seeing real results. So it's a value-aligned model with risk sharing and more flexibility for the customer. The second rule of monetization is there's actually a lot of flavors. Be aware of the options that are out there and really study them to make an informed decision about your pricing. So I've been collecting a bunch of examples about AI monetization. I have dozens. Here's just a small subset of examples. And I think the shocking thing for people is just the variety, and that can overwhelm folks with the choices involved, right? The amount of decisions that you need to think about. When we think about things like usage-based pricing, a usage metric is actually going to be very different for AWS than for OpenAI, than for HubSpot, than for insert company here. When I look at this complexity, I always try to simplify things, and so I distill these down into 5 main flavors of pricing. You've got flat fee subscriptions, seat-based pricing, hybrid models that usually have a platform or seat-based fee, and then some sort of usage or credits fee, usage-based pricing, and outcome-based pricing. And honestly, each of these models has pros and cons. There's no such thing as the best pricing model for you. As much as you might see on LinkedIn that like seat-based pricing is dead, seats might be the right answer for your business. So be aware of both kind of what are the advantages of the model, how your customers want to buy and what's important to them, but also the trade-offs involved. And then for those trade-offs, there's things that you can do in the sales process, how you design billing implementation, how you design structures around your pricing to get customers comfortable with whatever the limitation is. And one of those examples, when we think about usage-based pricing, many customers struggle with lack of predictability around usage-based pricing and what their bill is going to look like, right? But there's things that you can do, for example, with pricing structures to get customers more comfortable and make them feel like the pricing is more predictable. So with usage-based pricing, we often think about pay-as-you-go models, but more and more there are companies that have pay-as-you-go models with a cap, and so there's a spending cap both at an account level or even at a user level within the account, so customers feel like there's more control over how much they're going to spend. There are usage-based pricing tiers where you can buy a usage-based subscription, right, and you have some wiggle room of going over what you expected to use. I often see these as annual sort of drawdowns of usage rather than monthly, which controls for more seasonality and spikes. There's also platform fees plus usage, where you charge an upfront fee and then a lower ongoing fee, which allows you to communicate that usage fees are really affordable. Right? There's a lot of variety here. You can actually adapt these models and have different models for different customer types or different sales processes. And more companies actually have multiple flavors of these pricing structures at the same time. So it does mean more complexity, but it also allows you to navigate different customer scenarios. Rule 3 is avoid flat fees unless you have the margins to support them. Now, an example, it might be a more US-centric example, but wanted to share an example outside of tech. There's a company called MoviePass that really exploded around 2017, 2018 timeframe. So this was like a Spotify or Netflix, but for going and seeing films in the theater. They initially charged $9.95 for a monthly subscription, which gave you access to see essentially unlimited movies. MoviePass exploded. They went from near 0 to 3 million plus subscribers in a year. I'm not a math major, but I think that's a $300+ million run rate in less than a year. This for tech, they would be hailed as like the next Cursor or Lovable. We'd be talking about them on this stage. This is not tech, and they were burning tens of millions of dollars a month because their customers used the product a lot more than they expected. They ultimately had to shut down because of that lack of profitability. And we see similar things with the AI world and making sure that our pricing accounts for our cost structure. In my survey of 240 plus companies, I asked, what was your primary pricing model 12 months ago? My apologies for the rendering on the screen here. The flat fees are on the left. And 12 months ago, that was about 29% of companies had a flat fee pricing model. That was the #1 most common pricing model in SaaS. Seat-based was this next one. It's hard to read. It's 21%. Usage-based, 20%. Outcome-based, 3%. And then hybrid pricing, 27%. So SaaS pricing is still dominated by flat fees and seats. And I think on the flat fee side, this creates a lot of challenges, right? Your pricing is going to be overpriced for your smallest customers or folks getting started. Your largest customers are going to pay too little. Your best customers are going to pay too little. You have a real risk of unprofitable customers, and you have no real upsell motion. And so if you have a flat fee model today, I would encourage you to think about having 2 or more levers to upsell customers, and those could be based on products, they could be adding a usage-based component, or getting creative with other ways to expand customers over time. So if we're not doing flat fees, what are we doing? I see the real opportunity in this space is value-based pricing, but credits-based pricing, which is increasingly popular, is a bridge to value-based pricing. Now, I told you that MoviePass shut down. That's only partially true. They did come back to life, and this is their current pricing model. They've got a basic plan, a standard plan, and a premium plan, and it's a credits-based pricing model. So the basic plan has 34 credits. Credits roll over. Those credits can be used to watch movies, and different types of films have different credit conversion. This is essentially an AI pricing page just for movies. This is what I think about like 24 AI companies launched in the last couple weeks. And credits are really coming to SaaS and AI products in an extreme way. So I had shown you before data around 12 months ago, how companies were pricing. This is how that data looks 12 months ago versus today. And again, my apologies for the rendering, but the real uptake is in hybrid pricing models. So that went from 27% adoption to 41% adoption. And with these hybrid pricing models, often the core pricing is seat-based or a platform fee, and then each plan includes some baseline amount of credits, and then customers pay more as they use more credits. The nice thing about this is credits are kind of fungible, right? You can apply credits to a lot of different kinds of actions while keeping pricing kind of core. It means you can play around with some of the credit conversions, and it doesn't feel like a pricing change. The other thing is, as you launch new features that all cost more credits, your product team essentially becomes a revenue-generating expense, right? Because you have a natural way to monetize product improvements. And software companies used to tell me that their pricing was inspired by Salesforce or maybe Slack. Now they tell me that their pricing is inspired by Clay, Clay was relatively early in this credit-based concept, particularly in go-to-market tech, and all of their plans have unlimited users, but they monetize on two axes. One is the plan that you have access to, which is essentially the number of features that you have in your plan, and the second axis is the amount of credits, and credits can be used for data points or actions within the product. Now, I think credits are a great short-term phenomenon. They are a really fantastic bridge. But when I talk to enterprises, they tell me credits are really difficult to manage when everyone's doing credits, right? If your most important vendors have credit-based models, that's fine. But if an enterprise has a dozen vendors where they have to figure out how many credits they need for each vendor, and they have some where they're underusing what they expected, some that they're overusing and going into punitive overage territory, it just becomes kind of a nightmare to manage. And so I see credits as a bridge to get us to value-based pricing, which is ultimately where we want to go. And in the same survey, I asked folks, what is your expected pricing model 3 years from now? And you can see the big uplift is in outcome-based pricing that went from 5% adoption to 25% expected adoption. So clearly, folks in this room see this as well. Now, rule 5, have the pricing talk with your customers. And you can see this. The rule is not go to outcome-based pricing immediately. There are some phenomenal things about outcome-based pricing. When I was at OpenView, we led the seed investment in a company called ChargeFlow, which does fraudulent chargeback management for digital merchants. And ChargeFlow has had an amazing success with outcome-based pricing. They have no SaaS fees, no upfront fees. They just integrate with your systems like Stripe and Shopify. They go dispute fraudulent chargebacks on your behalf, and they take 25% on whatever found revenue they generate. The company has exploded. Customers love this model. It's really a win-win for this business. But the reality for most companies is that outcome-based pricing sets up really difficult fights over attribution and predictability. And so these are some screenshots from Intercom. But Intercom is another pioneer in outcome-based pricing. They charge based on resolutions. Well, that customer has to be really confident that your product resolved the issue, right, in order to be willing to pay for it. And for a lot of companies, if you charge for outcome-based pricing, all of a sudden that customer is scrutinizing the bill, right, and going, did you deliver that outcome, or did I deliver the outcome with a small assist from your product? The other thing is it's a lot less predictable. So outcome-based pricing is usage-based pricing squared. You have to look at the amount of usage the customer has, and then you have to figure out what percentage of that usage you're going to end up resulting in success. So for Intercom, for example, when they launched Fin, their success rate was only around 20%. Now they're about 70%, but there's a ton of variability across products. And so the customers naturally are going to have a hard time predicting how much they're going to spend. I encourage folks to think about this from a customer's perspective, right? Get into the customer's mindset. And for outcome-based pricing to work, you really have to figure out these 4 things, right? There has to be outcome consistency, so customers have to be looking for similar outcomes. You have to be able to nail attribution and define what outcomes look like up front and how you're going to measure that, right? The upfront work needs to happen. Otherwise, people are not going to trust that bill. You need to have a clear way of measuring that, where ideally you can see the measurement in real time. It's not on the customer to measure. And then you need to have a way to predict it, right? To estimate what the success is going to look like. The final rule of monetization is to build with pricing agility in mind. So things are changing really fast, right? Your pricing is likely going to need to change over the next 12 to 18 months, no matter what you do with it now. You want to plan for that change in mind, right? And so what that means is thinking about pricing before you even build and launch new products, right? So you have time to plan for monetization early. Thinking about optionality as your friend, so not necessarily locking in multi-year contracts with flat fees right now where there's no ability to expand that account. Remember that it only gets harder to change pricing as you get bigger, as you hire more sales reps, and as your customers are locked in. This is the easiest time that it will ever be for you to change pricing. Make sure to measure pricing KPIs and do postmortems on what happened to your last pricing change. So if you change pricing, what was the impact on win rate, on churn rates, right, on time to close, on average revenue per customer? You might find, for example, that it didn't have an impact, which might tell you, hey, we have confidence that we can do this again. And then don't let your systems hold you back, right? For a lot of folks, part of why pricing is such a bear is that their billing systems and their other technology don't allow them to have this agility. And so my two specific things that I would call out for folks in this room: someone needs to own pricing that's not just the founder. And what I mean by owning it is running a process where they get input from multiple different teams. It means that they're collecting data, they're talking to customers, right? They're measuring these pricing KPIs, and they ultimately bring these to some sort of steering committee that can make pricing decisions. At most companies that are less than 20 million ARR, it's still the founder and CEO that essentially owns pricing decisions, or nobody in many cases. And there's pros and cons of each different function owning pricing. I've seen it live in sales, product, marketing, finance, ops, really everywhere in an org. I don't have as strong feelings about who should own pricing as that you need someone to own pricing. We're in the golden age of pricing tech. There are vendors that offer platforms that have more engineering and finance-oriented tools, sales and RevOps-oriented tools, et cetera. You don't have an excuse anymore about the legacy systems holding you back. And in my view, we will not have profitable AI businesses unless we really can think about monetization early and get monetization right. So pricing is your path to AI growth. And whether you're a pre-seed company or a later stage company, pricing is really critical to nail right now. And I hope that this session inspired you to take a little bit more time on it. So thank you, everyone.